Well, hello, this is Doreen Garlid. I am a Tempe City Council member, and I am so happy that you've joined us tonight for another evening or moment with Richard Adkins, who is our City of Tempe's urban forester. And he is going to speak to us tonight about some of the issues about plants and trees and things that are going on right now. As you remember, when we did this the last time, we did it in the middle of summer when we had so much heat, and it really caused problems for our trees in Tempe. So we thought what we would try to do is to do these at different times in the season to talk a little bit about plants and your trees. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Richard Adkins and let him get us started for this evening. So Richard, it's all yours.
All right, well, thank you, Councilmember Garlid. Good evening, everybody. Basically, here to see if we can answer any questions that you might have. But like per the title of our event, Exploring the Urban Forest, some people might have questions exactly what Tempe's urban forest is. So I do have a little information I'm happy to share with you about that. So, and then I can answer questions at any time, and then we can talk about maybe species selection or, planting this time of year. It can be a little tough, but you can plant as long as you have some care. And then some things that we might want to consider with your planting and for keeping your trees and plants healthy during the summer. So first, our Tempe urban forest. Well, of course, the urban forest is both public and private properties within our approximately 40 square mile area that we call the city of Tempe. So we're getting close to about 27,000 trees the city maintains. And that's divided between about 17,500 trees in our parks, preserves, and around our city facilities. And then about another 9,500 trees along our rights of way and our multi-use trail system. Now, this land that the city maintains is only approximately 2% of that 40 square mile area. And basically that's comprising over 40 parks, which we have about almost 1,300 acres. Over 170 acres in our right of way, and then 96 acres along our multi-use trails on the sides of which we maintain. Within those tree species, I said 27,000. We have over 100 species and varieties of trees, palms, and tall cacti. If I had to value them all, it's almost $58 million if we had to try to replace all of these. And annually, right now, for the residents and visitors to Tempe, these trees, palms, cacti, provide a little over $1.2 million in benefits. I'm talking that's ecological benefits, of the environment, as well as economic benefits and societal health benefits for our community. So, and of course, as the forest grows, we plant more and some of the trees mature. Of course, that value goes up, right? So what does our species look like? Of course, we have a lot of mesquites. We have a lot of palo verdes, but we also have a number of other desert adapted trees that do quite well here. 33% of our forest is considered Sonoran desert natives. And then we have another 26% that is considered low water use or drought tolerant desert adapted species. So that's about 60% of our urban forest is made up of trees that do quite well in the desert, and others that have been brought here over the years, of course, and will do okay, but they do take a lot of extra care and, of course, a lot of extra watering. Now, I have had questions in the past about watering and about turf and turf grass. And people wanted to know, well, how many trees do we have that actually grow in grass? Well, about 40% of the city trees are located in our turf areas. Now, and people say, well, turf is a high water user and we live in the desert, so why do we have so much turf? Well, you got to think we are Tempe parks. So we have a lot of recreational parks as well as sport field facilities. So, and couple of golf courses. So the trees that grow around those, that comprises about 40%, but the other 60% are either in mulch, open soil in our preserves, or, along with decomposed granite along our trails and our rights of way. Tempe has been recognized as a Tree City USA for the past 25 years. We've also received a growth award in urban forestry stewardship for the last 15 straight years, which is quite an honor to be awarded by the National Arbor Day Foundation. And also, I'm very happy to say that Tempe is considered a Tree City of the World by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. This has been for 2 years. We've been recognized as that. And actually, the program's only 2 years old. So we were the first city in Arizona to be thus recognized, and the first of 11 cities in the United States. So that we're doing it for a second year, feeling pretty good about that. We're on the right track. And we are being recognized not only in our nation, but around the world for a lot of the sustainable urban forest efforts that we are putting in place. So with that, we do have spending for our urban forest. Some people might wonder. We spend approximately this past year $6.84 per capita. Now that's based on our population of about 196,000, which is kind of where we're sitting right now. So it's fairly healthy. I'm going to say it's one of the more robust programs in the metropolitan area here around Phoenix. But I'm also looking for a favorable budget this year. So maybe, we'll have to increase that amount as I'm looking forward to planting more, as well as putting some staff together to maintain some of our maturing trees. So, that's kind of exploring our urban forest in a nutshell. So if there's any questions, be happy to answer them now, because it is my charge to kind of maintain and increase this urban forest. So I have been digging into it, working with staff, working with contractors, and I also provide a lot of information to private homeowners, because private property and businesses, like I said, that's 98% of the city property. So it's not like the city is going to meet our canopy goals just on city property. We have to work together in the community. So I can provide that information, and you don't always have to take my word for it. I have lots of colleagues at our major universities here in the state that I work with. I can easily get information from them or refer some other information from around the country. So I consider me your information source if you need anything about trees or plants, and we'll go from there.
All right, thank you, Richard. And I am amazed, 27,000 trees. That is an awful lot. I just want to remind people that if they have questions, they can go ahead and put it in the chat group, and I will read those. But I have a question just in relation to our last time we did this gathering. What was the total of our tree loss, or bushes and trees lost, that we had last year when we had that extreme heat? What did we end up losing, and how do you then turn around and make those replacements?
An excellent question. Last year, from what I've got on the total between all the city maintained properties, we were about 350 to 400 trees that were lost. Now, within the last year or so, I've planted over 500 trees. So it is dynamic when you're working with the urban forest. You're always going to lose some, but right now we are ahead of that. What I have implemented with the blessings of council as well as our administration is our capital improvement funds. Every year I've set a certain percentage aside from that 29,000 which is basically 2% is what I've calculated, that we will lose due to storm, disease, or just general senescence, as trees age. And so there's a certain pocket of money, shall I say, to do replacements, because that's something that we haven't done in the past. We always lose trees every year, but we weren't replacing them. We were planting new, but we weren't accounting for all those losses at the same time, if that makes sense. So right now we've started that up. So I am working to replace the ones that we lost last year, those 350, 400 trees, as well as some of the new projects planting new trees.
Wow. That's an awful lot of work, but I'm so happy that you're doing that. So thank you so much. You're keeping us looking nice and helping with our tree canopy. So thank you for that. So there is a question on when is the best time to plant trees in regards to the summer and the heat right now? Is right now a good time, or have we missed that window?
Well, it's always a good time to plant tree. I'll go with that old adage, right? Because the best time is 20 years ago. The best time, second best time is like now, right? To me, for your average tree planting, we're starting getting out of the season. I like to plant in the Tempe area, or either anywhere in the Valley of the Sun here between October and April is optimal time for just the way the air temperatures are, as well as the need for decreased watering and care. You can plant now. I mean, it's going to be 110 this weekend. What we're looking at getting up into the teens next week. That's a lot of extra stress. So, I mean, you can plant at this time, but boy, you're going to have to give a lot of TLC to those trees and make sure you keep your soil moisture, which is probably the most important point. Soil moisture up. And for certain species, like honestly, I wouldn't plant any fruit trees right now. It is just too hot and the humidity is too low. And you're probably going to have to protect the bark with some sunshades or something. So it's really, you can plant now, but it's a lot of extra work to make sure that it's healthy and survive. Hopefully, does that kind of answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. So leading into that, another question is, what is the best type of tree to plant right now? And then is that the same as the question, what is the best leafing tree for shade that we can plant here in Arizona and Tempe?
Okay, for now, if you're really keen on planting a tree now, our desert species are the best. The mesquites love to be planted now. Mesquites, palo verdes, ironwoods. If you're ever doing transplant work with those trees, when you see, I know everybody has seen these big box trees that they're harvested out in the desert when they're doing construction or development projects, and then box of trees. You want to do that in the summertime with our desert species. So planting desert species now is great. The big leafy trees, our deciduous trees, I'd really caution planting your elms and your ashes right now. You can do it, but it does take a lot of that extra care I was talking about. The pistachios will do okay now, as well as some of the tipus. They've got the pinnate leaves on a lot of those species. You got your smaller leaves. They can handle the heat a little bit better. So those would be okay to start planting now. Others, honestly, and like some of the fruit trees, like I was saying, or citrus, I would not plant citrus now at all. I would wait until fall. Get your site ready, get your compost going, get your soil ready, and then when the fall comes, plant those trees.
Okay, that's great. All right, we have another question. Are there any species of trees that were more affected by the extreme heat last summer? And is there a plan to replace those trees with more resilient species?
Excellent question. Yes, I found a lot of our pines, of course, and as you know, our pines are a Mediterranean species. And so a lot of our Mediterranean plant palettes are common here in the valley, as well as in Southern California and going into New Mexico. And the pines were affected a lot because they transpire a lot during the summer. And if the soil moisture is not maintained, they drink faster than we can put the water back down if we lose that window of keeping the soil moisture adequate. Pines, a lot of the elms, A lot of the ashes, if you over pruned them, and that's a thing we can talk about, is coming on monsoon season. Everybody feels they have to get their trees pruned so the wind blows through them. That's a lot of misinformation, if I may say. If you've got a heavy extended branch or something like that, sure. You might want to, or something that's broken, you might want to get that maintained. But just taking your ash tree or your elm tree and pruning it so the wind blows through it is just something you shouldn't do, because the ashes will not respond to that very well with the heat coming on. Yeah, they will suffer. So those trees are probably the prime species that really were affected the most. I am replacing some of that. I'm replacing very few pines. There are some areas of where we have some pine groves where, yes, I have been putting a few in, but I'm not replacing the Aleppos. I'm replacing them more with the Elderica pines. And but I said that's just few and far in between, but they do provide a nice canopy in an area where they have been planted. I think we can grow them for, a while and try to make that a sustainable planting. Other than that, the elms, if they're planted in the right place, most of these trees, they'll tell you they weren't planted in the right location. And perhaps the stock was poor when it went in, the roots weren't developed very well. But yes, I am working on a number of different species that we're putting in because we want to plant a sustainable forest, not just for us today, but for our generation coming so that they have the benefits as well. And here in the desert, it's a lot different than, say, the East Coast or the Pacific Northwest, where you have trees that last for, they are aged 200, 300, 400 years. Out here, our oldest trees that are in our urban environment here, maybe 90, 100. Our palms are probably some of the oldest. Pines and eucalyptus are behind that. Most of our trees here in our urban environment, if we get 50, 60 years out of them, that's a very good long life. But see, I want to at least get that much and make sure that we're planting a staggered approach, so that we always have a good flexibility of our species as well as our age classes, because you want to have that diversity. So you don't have everything the same age at one time, and if something happens, well, then we lose everything. So, I want to make sure that I'm underplanting some of our maturing trees with some younger trees. Kind of a long answer, but try to give you the explanation of what the approach is when we're looking at species selection.
No, that was a great answer and lots of information in there also. And I had heard of people trimming the trees for the wind. And so it's so funny that you said that. You said that multiple times. Do not do that. So I got it. All right, another question. If somebody is moving to desert landscaping and has pine trees and mesquites and other trees on their property, what is your recommendation to trying to make sure that those trees continue to live in a desert landscaping when they're used to grass?
Yeah, and that's a common question, and it's one that I work with our water conservation people. They are quite keen on this approach. You can't, let's say, go cold turkey on going from a mesic or a turf type environment that is higher water use to a straight xeric type of landscape. These trees have these young feeder roots that they're just under the roots of the grass. They're in the top 6 inches of the soil. And, they're getting that constant moisture and have been for many years, especially in a lot of these older maturing properties. And so you've really got to be careful when you're getting rid of your turf and putting in a drip system or a flood bubbler type system, that you're going to have that supplemental water to wean these maturing trees back. If you just do it straight off the top, you're going to have trees that are stressed and they're going to suffer. And of course, it depends on the time of year. If you're going to do a turf conversion, I would think about it during the fall, especially if you have mature trees. That gives you the winter to get a system set up so that you can get your soil moisture there and work with the roots that are in there. And I would also advise mulch. A lot of people don't like the look of a composted mulch. They like the granite. The granite can be a heat sink. And, you know, you've had that cool grass for all that time, and all of a sudden you put in granite, and all of a sudden, wow, temperature just went up 15, 20 degrees outside of your home. And you got to think of how that affects the trees that are there, both the roots that are right under the soil, because the soil is starting to heat up, as well as the crown and that reflective sun that's coming up and hitting the leaves and or the needles of the pines. That's why I like mulch, and I can't speak enough about mulch. You think I talk too much about pruning trees for wind? Let's put mulch down under these or around our shrub beds. It helps retain our soil moisture, so what water you are putting down, you get like, you know, double down on that by keeping the moisture there, as well as it helps keep your soil temperatures cooler. And it provides, you know, the extra nutrients as the composted mulch breaks down.
Wow, I didn't even think about using mulch. For some reason, it just mulch in my head. I think of the Midwest. I don't think so much of using, you know, mulch out here around your plants in Arizona, but that makes an awful lot of sense. So speaking of pruning, then, what are your recommendations on pruning, and when should you do it? And does it vary with the type of trees that you have?
It does. Let me go back to mulch just a moment. We are starting to use mulch in a lot of our right-of-way landscapes that we're redoing when we're refreshing some of our right-of-way landscapes. We've got a couple of examples of that going in just so we can demonstrate that I think it's a viable approach for a ground cover. Pruning, coming into summer, it's really hard. The elms, the ashes, your big leaf deciduous trees that everybody thinks of are big shade trees. I tell you, those are the last trees I'm going to prune during the summertime. They just really do not take to a pruning. Now, if you have a hazardous branch or something that's broken, of course, you need to take care of that for safety and liability issues. But the summertime is a time for pruning our mesquites and our palo verdes and our ironwoods. You know, those type of desert trees, your sweet acacias, those can really handle pruning as long as you don't over prune. I want to stress not over pruning during the summertime. They respond to that quite well, and they'll actually hold their prune longer. When I say hold your prune, if you were to prune a mesquite in the wintertime, after that spring flush, you're going to say, well, gosh, what did I do 4 or 5 months ago? So pull up a chair and watch that mesquite grow. So, you know, the summertime is an excellent time. They compartmentalize quite well to stop any, you know, to start healing the wounding process, because pruning is a wounding process. I try to avoid pruning pines in the summertime. Not that they can't handle it, but they just drip a lot of sap. And that's not a bad thing. It just shows that the tree is healthy and, you know, sap is flowing, carrying nutrients and water throughout the crown, but it just can be messy. And you don't want sap dripping on your sidewalk, your furniture, your car, you. So that could be really messy. I like to prune them in the winter time. Most of the other deciduous trees, even like your desert willows, that, you know, they lose their leaves during the winter. That's the best time to prune those deciduous trees. You can see the structure really well, and it's easier to get into them, and you can really make the cuts. Now, I've had a lot of people ask me, well, how do you know when the branch is dead or if it's alive? It doesn't have any leaves on it. Well, if you look at it, you can see the buds on there. You can really tell the difference between a dead piece of wood and a live piece of wood. It's not as hard as you think biologically if you just look at it. So again, best time to prune your deciduous trees is, you know, between November and February. And your desert trees, I mean, if you have to prune them then you can, but the better time is during the summer.
Those are good answers. And what's funny is our neighbor trimmed back their pine trees yesterday, And we moved our car so that it could land on the driveway if they needed to. And my husband was walking barefoot out to take the garbage cans out, and he came back in and he had stuff stuck to his feet. So we got that sticky, drippy stuff. Okay, so we have another question. It says, what is a good shade tree for smaller front yard that stands in the winds without thorns? So without thorns, and a good shade tree for small front yards.
Small front yard. So when I'm thinking of a small front yard, 400 square feet to 600 square feet, 1,000 square foot's getting kind of a larger front yard, medium size, I guess. A shade tree. Well, the pistache is a good tree for that. When I say small, that'll work up to 600 square feet pretty well. If you're smaller than that, I'd probably just choose something like a mastic or a desert willow. Now you'll lose, the mastic is evergreen, so you'll have something year round. The desert willow, of course, is you're going to lose your leaves during the winter. A fruitless olive is an evergreen that is very low maintenance, and it says fruitless, so yes, it's 99% pollen and fruit free. Most of the ones that I've been planting in the city, I have not seen fruit or on them for a while. That's a very low maintenance, really nice shade tree. A little slow growing, but with a care and a little bit of extra moisture, I think it'll do just fine. That's good. You're at a bonita ash. If you're looking at the Arizona ashes, and there's like 5 different varieties that we plant here. To me, the bonita ash is the most drought tolerant, heat worthy, and it's good for a smaller front yard, especially if you've got something 400 square foot or under, because it's about a 20 by 20 tree, 20 foot high and about 20 foot wide, has good fall color. It does drop its leaves in the winter. They come back pretty fast in early spring, but a bonita ash would be an excellent choice of a shade tree, depending on, no matter what your exposure is. I would think that would be great. A few other smaller trees, if you have a desert landscape, a leatherleaf acacia is quite nice. The mulga, the Acacia anura, it's a nice tree. Some people like the shape. It's kind of pyramidal. It's, shape. It's got a nice, very easy to maintain look, but those are all pretty good shade trees for the smaller size front yard.
Okay, those are some great suggestions. And if that did not answer your question, if you want to write another one in the chat, that would be helpful. And so another thought is, what if you were an impatient person, what is the fastest growing tree that you could put in your yard?
For an impatient person, yes, I've had people say, "Hey, Richard, I don't even buy green bananas, so I want a tree that grows fast now," right? A mesquite. If you want one of the hybrid mesquites or a native mesquite, now you're going to have to maintain it, because you got to think a fast-growing tree means a lot of maintenance. Because it's going to grow fast, you have a lot of branches to prune, you might have leaves to pick up, you might have flowers and fruit debris everywhere. So you got to really consider and look at that when you're looking for a fast-growing tree. But you put in a mesquite now, you plant like a standard 24-inch box or even a 15-gallon size, they grow fast enough that you will have shade within 2 years. But just be aware of the maintenance responsibility that comes along with it.
That makes sense. So, and I just remind people, if they have any questions, to make sure you put it in the chat box for us, and we will get to them. So, you're also, as an urban forester, you're taking care of the trees and the bushes and the plants. And what type of grass is best in the Tempe area? And I know it probably changes, because you might have to have something that's underneath the soccer field that's a certain type of grass, or just sitting in Kiwanis Park, is that different? What's the best type of grass to have if you want a grass yard?
Well, that's a good question, and it kind of depends on your preference. Common Bermuda is what we have around here. Mid iron is probably the most common variety. Um, Tough as nails, shall I say. Doesn't need a whole lot of water. Comes back pretty strong out of dormancy. But then there's all sorts of TIFF and TIFWay and different types of hybrids that are a little bit more lush green, like you would have on a golf course or a putting green, something like that. Um, those are always good, but they take a little bit more care. You have two different types of mower, of lawn mower. You have the rotary and a reel. Some of the fancier Bermuda varieties have a much finer blade, and you need a reel mower to really make that look sharp. Otherwise, your common Bermuda, your mid-iron varieties with a rotary mower, standard what everybody knows, put that down, grows best. A lot of people have St. Augustine that grows pretty well here as a standard lawn, a little bit rougher. It's hardy, but it's not as soft to walk on if you're like barefoot and want to go out into the yard, but still a very strong grass. In our shaded areas, you can use Kentucky bluegrass if you have a really deep shaded area, like under a pine tree or something, and it'll last pretty much most of the year. But an interesting thing we do a lot of overseeding here. A lot of people overseed their lawns. And if you think about it, the perennial ryegrass, not the annual doesn't really hold up as much. The perennial ryegrass, I mean, we're putting that down in October and it's holding until June, July. So you got to think that's pretty much our primary turf. And then you have Bermuda under that that comes out when it really gets hot. And the interesting point, once Bermuda is really growing in October, is when we cut it all down and overseed it again with perennial rye. So I'm not a grass turf expert, but from my experience with grass, and especially growing grass with trees, because they are in competition, not only for nutrients and water, but in shade a lot of time, because we will shade out grass patches. That's where the bluegrass and maybe the perennial rye can hold for a while. But your standard Bermuda is what I would put down. Easy, goes out in sod. You can get seed if you want. Seed is tough. Perennial ryegrass seed, I mean, it basically grows on the sidewalk, pops up in, 8 to 12 days. Bermuda is a lot harder to seed in. So if you're doing that kind of a lawn, trying to maintain, that's something I would sod, and it's really not that expensive. Has a lot of turf information there. Hopefully I got to where you were looking for.
No, those are good answers. And it just popped a question in my head is, we have a pine tree, and underneath the tree in the shade, the grass is going great, but where it doesn't get any shade at all, and there should be a grass because we have a little small front yard, that grass is not doing so well. So it's I need a shuffle, I need a mix. I need one part of the yard, one type, and it flows into another type.
And a lot of people will do that if they have very dense shade, depending on the aspect where the sun angles are. Like I said, they'll have like that bluegrass or try to keep perennial rye as well as Bermuda at the same time. It is a management thing, though. You have to work on that. Or you put in mulch and just take care of the whole thing.
There you go. I like that idea. So I have a question we don't have a question in the chat box, so I'm going to ask you one. I kind of look and pay attention to the trees that we have or the plants that we have in our medians in Tempe, because I know that if they're in there, they're probably not ones that are going to grow out really far, because then they'll get into the road and it's in the driver's way. So I kind of pay attention and look at those. I like the color blending that are in some of the medians. What is your best shot, your best idea of colored plants that don't spread too much, that take a lot of work? Because, like, what do you put in your medians?
Excellent question. Yeah, I work with Sean Thompson. He oversees the right-of-way maintenance for our medians, and he has a lot of good designs that he has done over the past years. He uses a lot of Tacoma stands, which are yellow. They might get a little bit of frost damage in the summer, in the winter time if we get cold, but very nice, colorful, a smaller statured tree, yellow bells as they are known. A cascalote is a very nice tree. It's a desert species, does have thorns. You can get thornless varieties, but a little bit harder to come by. And that has yellow flowers in the winter. So that's the only thing that's really giving you that winter color. Other ones that'll fit that we use in the medians or stuff like Vitex pepper has that beautiful purple spikes of flower in the spring. They are deciduous though, so they are leafless in the wintertime. As well as Texas mountain laurel, beautiful purple flowers. Those we have a lot of those in our median as well. Some of the smaller acacias, the mulga, the leatherleaf acacia has nice yellow flowers, smaller statured trees. A lot of people say they're big bushes, but they're small trees. Those are all very good colors that you can put. And if you're not looking at all just trees, some of the bougainvillea varieties, you mix that red with some of those yellows. And then you get a purple in there with the Vitex pepper, absolutely wonderful colors.
Well, I really appreciate that. I'm just thinking, and of course I'm going to cause work for somebody else, but it would be really awesome to see something on our city's website to where it says, the plants in our medians, if you see the ones, they're this, or if they're this, if they're whatever, but have just a list of some of the trees and some of the bushes and trees and plants that we use, because we know that they're growing and we know that they look good, so that I can then turn around and say, I'm going to go to the Tempe's website and I'm going to see what they use, and I'm going to try to put that in my yard because I know it works. And then if it dies, then it's absolutely my fault and not. So if it works for you, it should work for me, but I don't know about that.
And that's an excellent idea. And our inventory that I have, because I have an inventory, I found all 27,000 of those trees. I have an inventory. I have them all marked on a map. I know what they all are, what size they are, and have all their conditions. My idea that I am working with, and it's just a matter of getting the programming together, is to have a public face of that information. I mean, for me, I've got a lot of attributes. I got like 16 attributes for every tree. And it's a lot of management information, which I don't think everybody needs. But just like you said, so that, wow, what tree was that? And I can go to the website and look up that species. That is something I am working toward. I'm hopefully by December, I'm going to have that type of an application available for residents just to go on and look up and see what the trees are at their park, along the right of way, out in front of their home, or whatever. I have worked with programs like that in the past. It's just a matter of getting it together with our information and making it available. Right now, though, just like you said, I have residents call me on the phone. Well, at the corner of Kyrene and Guadalupe, there's these 5 trees there that I really like to see and use in my yard. Do you know what they are? Absolutely, I do know what they are. And I can tell you exactly what they are for that matter and help you plan and design your yard.
Okay, you brought up a good point. It was going to be one of the questions I was going to ask you because I was thinking about this. Can you tell us a little bit about how you did your inventory? How long did it take? And then how often, you said you've got that information now. How often are you going to update it, and how do you update it? How is that going to work?
Excellent question. The inventory was mostly done when I came to the city of Tempe. I have been here for almost 2 years, hired as the urban forester, which Tempe was great because they hired the first urban forester in the state of Arizona. So I'm going to say that right there. Can't beat working for Tempe. That inventory took just over a year. If I was looking at the data, about a year and a half, looking at the notes for that inventory to be completed. Generally speaking, most municipalities re-inventory every 5 years. But with the size of ours, I have completely gone through it already, and I update it as we go. Long as I get all the data from supervisors in different departments, because there's a little bit different management pockets around, I can update it there. But honestly, I am going through it and re-inventorying it myself as we go. If I'm planting a parks project and there's 150 trees, I go out and I add them. The trees that are lost due to storm damage or disease or whatever, once I get them off, I take them off of the inventory. When I have a contractor do the work, we add and we subtract. We also keep mostly track of a lot of our pruning. So it's a task, but that's something that we work on just doing, I'm going to say daily. And then maybe at, like I said, the 5-year interval, I might get a company, because there are people that do that for so much a tree, and get them to come back in and we can go back together, just so that I have the transparency and there's a backup that it's not just what Richard says, but yes, this is what's out here. And so that we're all, all good and have that redundancy.
All right, that's great. It's such an incredible amount of work, but I'm sure it really does help you do your job so much better for us. And I'm so glad that we are the first city who had an urban forester. We are very, very proud of that and so happy that you're here. I do have another question in the chat. It says, how often should we water mature Palo Verdes and desert willow trees this summer?
Now, okay, when you say mature, the desert willows and the Palo Verdes, during the summer, they should be able, now when I say mature, they should be able to stand on their own, depending on where they're at. But let's put that caveat into an urban environment. If they're out in the preserve or they're out in the Sonoran Desert, of course, we're not watering them at all just whenever it rains. But in an urban environment, you got to think we've got different aspects of urban form and fabric. So you've got hardscape, you've got streets, you've got houses, you've got reflected light, you've got different soil volumes that plants have to work with. So these are observations you really need to make. So if you're talking about a Palo Verde or a desert willow that's in your yard at your property, you want to kind of just see what the tree tells you. Kind of listen to what it's showing you. Generally off the cuff, I'd say right now would be a good time to give your Palo Verde a good drink. It had a good flower this year, most likely. And so all the flowers have dropped. You've got seed coming on. Give it a good drink now, and then probably midsummer. I would give it a good irrigation, maybe with a soaker hose, or depending on what kind of irrigation you have for a mature tree. Same with the desert willows, because they've just finished flowering, most of them. Good irrigation now. Then midsummer, then probably again in August. So I'm only talking like a couple of times for your mature trees. And, some people might say, well, I've got a drip system on it. Drip system's been there for years. Well, I want to see where that drip system is. If it's up near the trunk, it's really not doing anything, because you want to make sure when you're watering, even your mature trees, you're watering out where the crown is, where the drip line, where, the shape of the tree. That's where your fibrous roots are that really want to pick up that irrigation. So generally, if it's a mature Palo Verde or a desert species tree, it should be able to handle itself. Depending on what soil volume is, how it sits on your property, the aspect, reflected heat, sidewalks, driveways, you want to look at it and it'll tell you. It'll start turning a little bit yellow perhaps. The leaves won't look as vibrant. Then I might give it a good drink, like I said, 2 or 3 times throughout the summer. And that's probably all it would need.
All right, thank you. So on to another tree. How often should you fertilize your citrus trees? have heard that it is Valentine's Day, Memorial Day, Labor Day, something like that. What is your recommendation?
And that's pretty much the standard these days. That has been in the industry. Definitely not now. And I would say that now for just about any trees. Going into the summer, please don't fertilize. The extra nitrogen, as well as the salt content of the fertilizer, with the heat, it's just something that you really don't need that extra growth or that extra stress on the tree. Definitely not now. Valentine's Day is a good because it's right after the right during the bloom, or the bloom is coming. So that's good. Memorial Day is your second major time to be hitting for your citrus. There's different schools of thought about Labor Day. You might want to hit a little bit in August, but after Labor Day, the fruit is set. There's been some research that's come out of the University of Arizona that say that might not be a good time past that point to do fertilizer, because if always when you're doing fertilizer, you want to do just a little bit with your citrus, because you can blow the blossoms off when it's young, and you can spoil the fruit when the fruit's maturing. So there is a good handout on fertilizing citrus from the University of Arizona's extension. I would recommend you looking that up. It has the different rates for all the different types of citrus, because honestly, your lemons and limes are a little bit different from your grapefruits and your oranges. So they have different amounts of nitrogen throughout the year. So I would look up that extension bulletin from the University of Arizona and follow their guidelines. It works for me.
That's great information. So I would like to try to figure out if we can get a link to that paperwork and then maybe put it on your urban forest website. That would be great for people to click on. The other one that I found was helpful when we were planting plants was from the Arizona Municipal Water Users Association. They have links to these amazing books that they have on planting trees, desert landscaping, things like that. I think there's 3 different booklets that are really incredible list of information in there for people to be able to use, and maybe we can link that also. So another question is how do we avoid the extreme heat possibilities for this summer with the problems that we had with our trees from last summer? What can we do to be proactive so that we don't end up in the same place?
The best proactive activity to do, you should have already started, is working our soil moisture, making sure that you have adequate soil moisture. Once you get behind, I'm going to say that's the most important thing. Once the soil dries out to a certain depth, no matter how much water you keep adding back to it, the tree is drinking it, or the plant is using it as fast as you can add it, and it's already put into a stress area. I can go into a lot of biology about xylem cavitation, where the water column breaks within the cell structure of the tree, and that's basically trees having a heart attack, as an analogy. It's a little too heavy for some of that, but basically it's soil moisture. And I'm not talking just turning the hose on and just leaving it, because the soil does need to dry out a little bit between waterings, especially the top couple of inches, because roots need water, but they also need oxygen. And if we have it totally saturated with water all the time, there's no pore space for oxygen for the roots to use. So I'm not talking, when I say soil moisture, no, we're not flooding it 24/7 for 3 months. We need to just make sure we have adequate moisture to the carrying capacity of the soil. And so that the roots, because the roots will start shrinking away and pulling away and dehydrating. And then it's that contact within the pore space of the soil really makes it hard to pick up that moisture as well as the nutrients. So long answer to say soil moisture, and maintaining that throughout the summer. That helps with sun scald on a lot of the plant tissues. It helps to keep the soil temperature lower so it can protect the roots. and just provides that constant moisture that is needed for the trees to transpire. And again, mulch really helps with that.
I think the next time we do one of these events, we're going to put mulch right behind you. You should have mulch and a big sign behind your head so we can all see it. So that's, I mean, that's a really good point, because I think that was such a tough time last year. So it's good to kind of get that information. So the thought now that I should have been doing this already is really keeping that ground moist. I need to really turn around and focus on that right now. So I don't have any other questions. If anybody has questions, please make sure you put it in the Q&A section so that we can ask that. But Richard, do you have anything else you want to share with us in between while we wait a couple more minutes for questions? Oh, you have to unmute. Gotcha.
Thank you. Got me. That was the first time. Just with the soil moisture, if you have planted trees recently within the past year, depending on where they are, you might want to consider protecting the bark. If they're a thin bark tree, like some of the ashes or even some of your citrus, or if you put in new fruit trees this past winter, that intense solar radiation that we get in the summer will actually can scald and damage the bark tissue and the vascular tissue underneath. So something with young trees would be protecting that. You can wrap them. There's like tree wrap that you can buy at the stores that you just kind of wrap it down around the trunk. Or even just a simple cardboard tube. I just use an old box, tape it together, and just have a tube that loosely fits around the trunk, just so you can protect that, or either some sunshades. A lot of people will build those. I would just add that for protection, especially for our non-native and thin bark species. That would be something that you would want to think about as we're getting into summer.
Yeah. I know that we paint our citrus trees on the bottom of them. Is that will work also?
It is, and it's a very standard practice. It's not just decorative, because you have that. It's a whitewash. You want to use a water-based paint, not an oil-based, please. And you can really thin it out with water, like making your whitewash, and that just reflects the heat off of the trunk, and that's very effective for. You see it a lot on mulberries as well as citrus, because citrus are really bushes, and we make them into trees. Makes it harder to pick the fruit, but it also, those branches, as they hang down, they protect and shade the bark. And so if you prune them up too much, then yeah, putting that whitewash paint around them, it's actually a very good idea.
All right, so I'm looking forward to the time when we can do this in person, because I could just picture us sitting like at Kiwanis Park and people come and ask questions, and you can actually point at branches or point at trees, and we could all learn from you and use your expertise. And I don't have any other questions in the chat, and I think we could probably go ahead and wrap up unless you have anything else that you want to share.
I like that idea. We can do tree walks around our parks. I do have an idea for putting an app together that will have certain parks, will have the trees located, and people could go do it on their own. Just like you were talking about earlier, what tree is that? But yes, so that we could be together and just walk around, look at trees, touch trees, hug trees. I mean, that's what it's all about, right? People always ask you what your favorite tree is, right? I was attending a webinar the other day. It was an international webinar about arts and urban forestry, because that's become a very large communication medium now to get people interested in the value and benefits of trees through arts. And instead of asking people what their favorite tree is, maybe you should ask a tree what their favorite person is. I'll just leave you with that.
That's a good one. Well, you know what? We've got one question just slipped in just before I was going to get us out. We have last year, our desert willow leaves burned leaf tips. What can we do this year?
Now, a lot of the leaf tips, if it turned a little bit yellow and then brown, that can be salt damage. So that's something that can be from overwatering, for one, because our water here, as you know, in the valley is very high in minerals and salts. And especially if you even sprayed some of the leaves, if they got hit by like a sprinkler or something like that, that salt and that mineral buildup on the leaf can burn it. I'm not sure if that's exactly what happened, but that's a lot of what I see, the leaf tips. That'll happen on the elms, that'll happen on the ashes a lot. And it just has to do with you need to flush the salts out of the soil because that happens a lot with the consistent irrigation. And I'll take a moment on that. So I was talking about putting water around trees and making sure we got soil moisture. And so now, Richard, you're saying, well, too much soil, too much moisture, and I can have salt damage. Well, the whole thing is getting a slow volume that hydrates the whole soil profile, not 20 minutes a day, 6 days a week. That really does not provide enough water for trees. Instead of 20 minutes a day, 6 days a week, water for 3 hours, 1 time a week. That pushes that salt and that minerals through the soil profile. You have a healthier soil, you better nutrient uptake for the trees, and you might help alleviate some of that damage to the leaves.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm just gonna see if it's possible to open the mic for Jay Hall to make sure that we did answer that question. So if you can hold on just a moment. Okay,
Hi.
are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. I want to make sure that Richard was able to ask your question. So if you would like to introduce yourself and then make sure we got that question correct for you or the answer right.
I think so. I live in North Tempe and we have a mature desert willow in the backyard, and the tips became really brown. We don't have like sprinkler irrigation. We do the drip irrigation. And so I was confused as really what to do this year.
Okay, and it could be just the drip irrigation and the salts in the soil. That's what you find. It's expressed in the leaves. But also, if it's a mature tree, if it's in the backyard, if perhaps you have a western exposure, I mean, if the soil moisture isn't adequate, I mean, when it gets to be 115 and 120 degrees, cell tissues in tree leaves just start to die. Bottom line, especially if it's like that for weeks on end. So if it's just the tips of the leaf, I honestly, other than just the aesthetics of it, I wouldn't be too worried about it. If you get a whole branch that's really starting to turn, okay, then we got some other issues we got to look into. But if it's just a couple of tips here and there, it could be the salt for one, and that's something that I would consider. And it could just be, wow, it's 115 for 15 days, and gosh, we're all hot and probably starting to turn that way.
Okay, well, thank you. That helps a lot.
I have a question follow-up with that. If it is the salt in the water, what could be done to counteract the salt? Is there something that you can do to counteract that?
Basically, just your irrigation management, flushing that salt down through. A lot of times you can get acid injectors, injector system for your irrigation. That's a little bit more involved than your average homeowner, property owner do. A lot of HOAs have these systems, and it's very important, especially if you're using reclaimed water. Now, we don't have that here in Tempe, but other municipalities, if they're using reclaimed water, if you don't have an acid injector system in to help counteract some of those salts, you are going to have lots of problems with your plant material.
All right, thank you. And Jay Hall, I hope that answered your question. So I just want to say thank you so much for everybody who was able to join us. And We have recorded this event tonight, so we will find ways to put that on the link on my webpage at Doreen, for the Doreen Garlid council member. If you look under council member page, there'll be a link, and then we're going to try to work on putting this on the page, the link for tempe.gov/urban forest, so that if you wanted to see it, or if you had more questions or wanted to follow up on some of the suggestions that Richard had, you'll be able to find that. So Richard, I want to say it's amazing to have you working with the city of Tempe. Thank you so very much for everything you're doing for our urban forest and taking care of us and answering our questions. So thank you so much for being here. The other thing was, I was just told that we're also have this posted on Tempe 11 and the YouTube channel for the city. So thank you so much, Richard. I appreciate your time. And thank you, Kristen Gwynn, our council aide, for helping us tonight.
Thank you. You're very welcome. Anytime. My pleasure.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.